National security and public safety are the preeminent functions of government. National security and public safety are not simply factors to be considered in the administration of some broader policy objective. National security and public safety are the ultimate policy objectives. The safety and security of our fellow citizens should be the driving force behind all decisions that we make as representatives. And as representatives, it would be incongruent for us to undertake any act or fail to undertake an act calculated to jeopardize the safety and security of those who sent us here in the first place. People do not employ us to represent them so we can take risk with their security. They send us here to put their security at the top of our constitutional to-do list. This country has a rich and long history of welcoming those fleeing persecution. We have a long and rich history of liberating those suffering under oppression. We are the most welcoming country in the world, and we are the most generous country in the world. And we help those in need both here and abroad, and we administer that aid in greater quantities than anyone else. Our country has welcomed over 3 million refugees since 1975. We consistently provide aid to those in need. We provide protection for those who cannot protect themselves. And we provide a defense for those who are defenseless. Regrettably, the world we find ourselves in is imperfect and seemingly becoming more imperfect. It is because we are free and secure and an orderly society rooted in public safety that we have the liberty of being generous to other people. Rather than address the underlying pathology that results in displaced people, those in charge of our foreign policy seem more interested in treating the symptoms. There are refugees from the Middle East and Northern Africa because those regions are on fire and riddled with chaos, and our bright lines and policies of containment and smart power, or whatever we call it today, have failed. Terrorists took the lives of over 100 innocent people in France and injured many more for no other reason than the fact that they could. They killed 100 because they couldn't kill 1,000. And their objective is evil for the sake of evil. It is murder for the sake of murder. It is wanton and willful violence, premeditated depravity, calculated to take as many innocent lives as possible. The acts of barbarism committed against the people of France are the latest in a long line of malevolent acts committed against innocents. And that line is not likely to be over. CIA Director Brennan said what happened in France was not a one-off event. We also know ISIS terrorists are intent on finding ways to attack America and our allies, including here. Director Brennan said ISIS has an external agenda they are determined to carry out. Another administration official said, I wouldn't put it past ISIS to infiltrate operatives among refugees, so that's a huge concern of ours. Those are not the words of some GOP presidential hopeful. Those are the words of our very own intelligence officials who serve this administration. The president has said he's too busy to debate the critical issue, and unfortunately what passes for debate in this political day and age is some absurd conclusion about widows and orphans. It is precisely that kind of hyper-partisan conclusion designed to cut off debate rather than discuss foreign policy that has united this country in only this one fact. We have no idea what our foreign policy is in the Middle East. The people I represent are kind and generous, and they are asking this administration and this president one simple question. What assurance can you give us with respect to our public safety and national security? And so far, no one has been able to provide that assurance. On Monday, the president said the country would continue to accept Syrian refugees, but only after subjecting them to rigorous screening and security checks. Those are wonderful words. But at some point, you have to ask, what does that mean? And the head of our own FBI said the concern in Syria, the lack of our footprint on the ground in Syria, that the databases won't have the information we need. So it's not that we don't have a process, we don't have any information. So you're talking about a country that's a failed state, that doesn't have any infrastructure. All the data sets, the police, the intel services you normally would go to and seek that information don't exist. That is not a Republican presidential hopeful. That is the head of the FBI. He also said we can only query against that which we've collected. And so if someone has never made a ripple in a pond in Syria, or I'll add any other place, in a way that would get their identity or their interest reflected in our database, we can query our database until the cows come home. But nothing will show up because there is no record on that person. Lastly, he said, I can't sit here and offer anybody an absolute assurance that there's no risk associated with this. So the question then becomes, what amount of risk is acceptable? If our experts are telling us this is not a risk-free endeavor, and few things in life are, but someone's going to need to tell me and the people I work for what amount of risk is acceptable when you're talking about national security and public safety. And I'll say this in conclusion. The president says we're scared of widows and orphans. With all due respect to him, what I'm really afraid of is a foreign policy that creates more widows and orphans. So where maybe he ought to start is a foreign policy in the Middle East, including Syria, where people can go back to their homelands, which is their preference, go back to their homelands. Maybe you ought to defeat that JV team that you thought you had contained. That would be the very best thing you could do to help people who aspire to a better life.